Here we are back for another episode of Limitless. I am joined today by Glen Kunofsky, who is the founder and CEO of SURMOUNT. Glen, let's jump right into it. First off, thank you for joining, and how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you, Aaron?
Doing pretty well. Ready to explore your story and hear more about it. And as we do with all of our episodes, we like to start back in the beginning when you were little, Glen. So I guess tell us about your childhood. Where did you grow up, and what was your family dynamic like?
So I have very, good upbringing, but both my parents were teachers in New York City public schools, and then advancing on to be guidance counselors, and then assistant principals and principals. So very much didn't come from any type of real estate background with my family. My parents were together my whole life. Very stable upbringing. I grew up I was born in Queens. My parents moved Queens, New York, in the city here. And then my parents moved, what at that time was like upstate New York, which is about an hour north of the city. It was not as much suburban as it is now. It's still Rockland County, a town called New City, still about an hour, without traffic up there. But it's not an easy place to commute from, like Westchester County or Long Island. So very much like my parents drove in every day back and forth. Grew up very middle class. My parents basically left the home every day at 5:30 and met 5 people in a carpool and commuted into the city, and were teachers.
Nice.
So that's sort of how I started.
And what about siblings?
I have one brother. My brother is also a music teacher in the Bronx, sort of where my dad teaches elementary school music. Been doing that about 25 years. He's about 2 years younger than I am.
Okay, cool. So what were you into? It sounds like education was a major point of emphasis in the Kunofsky home, if I had to guess, based on what everybody either did or ended up doing. But what else were you into as a kid?
It wasn't. I wasn't the greatest student. Like back in the day, I don't think I was really diagnosed, but definitely like ADHD and dyslexic. So, but very much learned by talking to people and learned by listening. So as a student, if I was not the most behaved kid, both as a young student and as an old student, but if I liked the teacher and I liked what they were saying, I could absorb a lot, and that's sort of taken me through life in general. I'm not a big studier, but when I hear something and I'm interested in engaging with someone, that's how I learn. So the teachers that were my starting out that were really good at explaining things at the time, that's how I learned. So I even though my parents were educators, I wasn't the best student in terms of behavior, as well as in terms of getting the best grades. In a class I didn't like, I could sneak by with a C, and if I really liked the teacher, I could get an A just by listening and being engaged with what they had to say.
Nice. Love that. So you were a good student by choice at certain times. Totally get that. And you'd be amazed how often we hear either diagnosed or undiagnosed just because it was sort of not mainstream at the time, ADHD and or dyslexia on this show. It's a very consistent theme with a lot of our guests, along with some other ones, which is why I'm curious to hear about what you were up to when you weren't a student in school.
So I was always working, did all the traditional, from maybe 8 or 9 years old, paper routes, shoveling snow for money, always wanted to be independent for some reason, even as a little kid, and earn my way, mowing lawns, anything that I could earn $1 doing, I would do, and always was motivated that way. Was pretty big into sports. I was a decent athlete, played lacrosse and soccer were my 2 big ones. Really stunk at baseball, was kind of, little traumatic, always not making Little League, but then pushed me into lacrosse harder. Loved it. Loved getting out there. I loved competing. So it's sort of like one of those things of like still being involved in watching and playing sports and doing things in that competitive nature of that was something that I really always loved. So between that and like always having some sort of work project going on, and found little nichey things to do. Like my first thing in real estate was probably at like 13 years old. Like I said, where I grew up was fairly rural, and behind where I lived, there was cornfields, and then eventually it started becoming more and more suburban. So they were building like homes out there. Walking home from school one day, I don't know how I came across one of the guys working there, and he said, "Hey, you want a job being like a laborer cleaning up the place?" Probably at, I don't know, when I was about 13, maybe 8th grade, I started working on the construction site there, and just sort of like understanding different traits and learning, and kind of like from sort of 13 to maybe 17 or 18, always worked in construction. Started just as a laborer cleaning up after people and earning cash there, and then getting a little bit better into just some carpentry, painting, just generally helping out. And that was a theme how I got into real estate when I moved out to Arizona.
Nice. Okay, so that's a perfect segue. I guess after high school, or I guess tell us about the timing of moving to Arizona. Did that happen during high school, right after?
So in high school, sticking with the theme, not being the greatest behaved kids, like I was liked. The principal of my high school, since I was always in his office, strongly recommended my senior year in high school that I go to this program for community college. And so my senior year of high school, I was able to basically get my classes Tuesday, Thursday, and then work Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and also continue to play soccer and lacrosse at my high school. But I didn't go to a traditional, my senior year was like working and saving money. I worked at a plant and landscaping store, basically got in 40 hours of work week because, I was really just trying to earn money to do the things I wanted independently. And then the second year to get my associate's degree, I met a bunch of other classmates that were doing the same program. One of them was a year older than me and said, hey, he was going to move out to Arizona and go to school out there, and basically made a decision in a week. I hadn't applied to any other colleges because I thought I was going to do the second year in this community college in Rockland, and just got in the car, drove to Arizona. I guess that was August of 1989, and got in the car, applied to community college, Mesa Community College next to ASU for my first semester. And that's how I made my way out to Arizona. Really no plan.
Love that. What happens next?
So what happens next is sort of on the real estate side. Well, there's two things. As soon as I moved out there, I got a job helping a guy laying tile, and learned basically how to set and lay tile. And at the same time, we moved into a student housing complex, which is actually kind of an interesting story, because 20 years later, became partners with a guy. I don't know if you've run into Peter Katz from Marcus and Millichap. He's one of the top student housing brokers, but he also is an investor and an owner. But him and I were talking years ago, and he actually owned the student housing complex that I moved into, which I quickly found out they targeted out-of-state students, and it was the nicest campus, right? Nicest complex next to ASU, but they basically paired you up with 4 people into a 2-bedroom apartment and charged you, I think it was about $350 a month, but they put 4 people in a 2-bedroom. At the time, you went about a half a mile down, and you could rent a 2-bedroom apartment for about $400 total.
Oh, wow.
So everybody's parents had to co-sign on these leases and everything else. So it was me and my buddy. So sort of about 4 months into that process, we figured out that like we wanted to have, more space and get a house. We went out. This was the sort of beginning of the savings and loan crisis. And we went out with a realtor to go rent a house so we could have a pool and a bigger party. And the realtor said, hey, you can buy a house for like $3,000 down and assume a mortgage. And buddy who I moved out there with and I were like, we're going to split this and we're going to find a house. So fast forward, we get to the day of closing. We each had to come up with about $2,000. I had the money from working. He didn't have the money to come up with his half. So I bought my first investment property at 19 when I moved out there, and basically recruited a bunch of other people that I met to be my tenants in this house. And that was my first investment property and foray into real estate.
And you're still a student at this time?
19, yeah, freshman year, about 6 months in to being at school. And then sort of fast forward, not spend too much time on it. During college, I acquired about 19 houses, all, within about a mile of ASU, fixed them up myself and then rented them. That's how I got into investment real estate originally.
Wow. And all this while managing a full-time school loan?
Yep, full-time school. And then I still had and then I worked for the tile guy, and then I started my own sort of floor covering business, basically advertising that I would do people's kitchens and bathrooms. And that was sort of got into that business. But then after college, I started growing my real estate portfolio, started buying small multifamily properties in the same area in Tempe and Scottsdale around ASU. I got it up to over about 10 years. I think I had about 230 units in total, like a good amount being single family, and then owning like 4plexes, 8plexes. I think the largest thing I owned at that time was like about 20 units.
Wow, that's quite impressive. I mean, while you were in school, were you studying business and considering maybe doing something else, or did you know that, hey, I'm doing this school thing just to fall back on, but ultimately I already know what I want to do with my life, which is real estate?
I really had never had like a direct path of I want to do this. It was just sort of where I could make money. And like I came up with once I figured out how to like buy these assumable loan properties, really wasn't taught anything, formally in school. I did get a minor in business. There was really no real estate program at the time at ASU. They had a business and finance program. I majored in hotel and restaurant management, which sort of came around to help me a little bit, but it was sort of this path of where can I make money? So I had the skills to fix up the properties. And as I started doing more jobs and meeting more people, I met painters and carpenters and cabinet guys, and, basically got my general contractor's license, did all the work to fix these up, and was basically a simple formula that, I wanted to make, 10% on the money invested that I would put down and assume these loans. I was assuming these loans were anywhere from 13 to 17%. And the bank would give you the loan if you came up with the closing costs and you could assume it. So it was, a pretty simple formula. Scottsdale, you could buy a house for like $200,000 and rent it for about $1,000 a month. And Tempe,
that's changed.
yeah, exactly. And in Tempe though, around the college, you would buy a house for $100,000 and be able to get the same in rent. So the equation was much easier. The demand, anything walking distance to ASU. And it's interesting, only the property that I originally bought had I gotten students in. Everything else was usually like young professionals or other people leasing the properties. But that was sort of my first forays into real estate. And then I partnered up with a guy that had a carpet company, and we opened like sort of a retail design center for builders, and like a lot of other real estate owners and multifamily. And that's sort of where I met my first mentor, was a gentleman who owned a bunch of office buildings and a bunch of multifamily that we did carpet and tile for. And he was the first one said to me, is like, Glenn, you should take this more forward and go into commercial real estate. It's much better than residential. You're not going to be like dealing with toilets and tenants and everything, and sort of pushed me into sort of trying to invest in my first commercial property.
I'm not here to cut you off. You keep going. This is great.
So just to not spend too much time from there, and then basically had the construction company from call it, age 22 to 29 or 30, and continued to build and manage my own properties out there. I met my wife in school. Actually, second day I was in Arizona at that student housing complex. I met my wife, and she was one of my first tenants that moved into my first property, and she's been with me since.
That's amazing. I love that.
So she was from the East Coast, also from Connecticut. And, she started a career a much more professional way, working at KPMG. And we always said, when if we were going to get married, and we would probably move back to the East Coast. One day she came home from work and said, hey, we'd always talked about this. I put in for a transfer and I got a job at KPMG at their national headquarters in Woodcliff Lake, New Jersey. And, if you want to be with me, you got to come on back and we got to figure out. And so she pushed me along. That was how made my way back to the East Coast. I was self-managing all my properties myself. I had my own maintenance crews. I had my own collections, and turned it over to a management company when I left, which wasn't highly successful. Like, my expenses went up, my collections went up, and everything was a little bit more complicated. So I spent a year going back and forth, and I sold my half of the construction company to my partner, and spent like a year going back and forth between Arizona and New York to sell off all my interests there. I was sort of lucky and unlucky. I got in, like I said, in the 89, and I got out in sort of 99, 2000, which I saw, like, I was always cash flowing to my properties, and I saw maybe about 20% appreciation on, buy to buy, and was always positive cash flow. And then from there, I sold probably from 2000 to 2007, the properties probably tripled or quadrupled in value in Arizona.
Yeah.
I sold the last 5 properties and carried a note to a buddy of mine who was a real estate agent out there. And I think he called me up like 5 years later and said he sold 1 property for what he paid for the 5. So he did well, I did well. And then I didn't know what I was going to do. I know you've had Bob Knackel on your podcast before. Actually interviewed with him and Paul Massey to start in Brokerage, and I interviewed with Marcus and Millichap. And it's kind of interesting how Brokerage works and how we run the company today. But a lot of these groups and a lot of commercial brokerage are all about numbers and cold calls and amount of proposals to conversions to listings, and sort of listen to a lot of pitches of going to different brokerage companies. Because at that point I was basically 30 years old and didn't know what I was going to do with myself. And all I knew was real estate. So I got my license. I met a guy who had come to work at Marcus and Millichap. I had known them because I used them a couple times to both buy and sell some of my small multifamily in Phoenix, and ultimately decided to go with Marcus and Millichap at that time. Bob and Paul give me a lot of shit every time I see them.
Rightfully so, it sounds like. So you signed on with Marcus and Millichap. What made you different is that, you were technically not an experienced broker, but you're not a little kid. You're a man at this point, and you had real estate investing experience. Interesting route to take. What ultimately led you to choose Brokerage as opposed to investing in, I think I may know the answer, but investing in New York or close to it?
The answer, like 200 units in Arizona doesn't equal a lot of buying power in New York City, even in 2000. But I actually did the last 5 properties that I sold, I exchanged into a property in New York, a small multifamily deal that I moved into and, self-managed and everything else. But really the answer was I was almost 30 years old or was 30 years old and didn't have any experience working for anyone else. I don't think Goldman Sachs or anyone was going to hire Glen Kunofsky, who went to community college in ASU and then worked for 10 years doing it. So it was either do it myself or not do it. And like brokerage seemed like a logical progression. I had sold some of the properties myself. I had my real estate license in Arizona. And like real estate was either, was going to be the way I wanted to go. So, most of these real estate companies, and it's funny how we founded our company later on and how I started my team. But basically most real estate companies are just, here's a phone and a computer. At the time I started, most people didn't even have a computer. In 99, 2000, you had a Rolodex and you bought lists of properties of people to call. But that's really the only path I had available to me was to go into brokerage.
Wow. So talk to us about your progression in brokerage. I mean, you start with Marcus. How does it go the first year or two? And take us through that story of your journey, that part of your journey.
So they hired me to be, like I said, I had my degree in hotel restaurant management. I did an internship in a hotel one time out like to get my degree. And then they hired me to be the East Coast hotel specialist for Marcus and Millichap because they didn't have anyone stupid enough to try and sell hotels at that time. So that's what they hired me to do. I databased and, as a junior young broker, they're not hiring you to sell the Marriott Marquis in Times Square. So I had a database of limited service hotel owner, Super 8s, Best Westerns, Ramadas, anywhere from DC to Maine. Most of them were Indian owners. I was a member of AHOA, the Asian American Hotel Owners Association, calling on hotel owners. The tricky part with hotels was, you're selling like an operating business. Everyone lies about their expenses. So it was we went about 18 months without getting a closing.
Okay. Not exactly the recipe for success.
18 months. And then I sort of fell into creating a net lease. At the time, there was really no private market for selling net leases. There was a couple of people selling existing commercial freestanding net leases, but when I was at Marcus, I had we used to have a national call to present listings, and everyone go into these conference rooms and they'd log in everyone. It was big technology at that point. This is not Zoom. This is and people you'd have to present listings, and they presented a listing of a Burger King, and I had a family member who worked for the company, and I said, I called them up after I saw this listing of the Burger King. It was a company called Carroll's Corp at the time.
Okay.
And they were selling the property for an 8 cap. So I called up this family member and I said, hey, you're doing business with my firm and you're not doing, he's like, no, we're not doing business with your firm. We sold 10 of our properties to pay for an acquisition to a REIT, and the REIT is selling the properties through Marcus and Millichap. And I said, what was the cap rate? And this is in about, I'm trying to think, 99, actually probably around 2000, 2001. I sometimes get my dates and times mixed up. But basically, they said, we sold to this REIT. And I said, what did you sell at? And they said, we sold at a 10 cap. I'm like, well, these guys are selling it at an 8 cap. Why wouldn't you just hire us to sell it at an 8 cap? And that was my first sale-leaseback foray of getting out of hotels and convinced them to list a property with me, sold it, learned a little bit about what these tenants were wanting, both from flexibility and studying the leases and everything else. So a theme through my career has always been learning from people and clients. Like I said, I learn best from actions and seeing people who are smart doing what they were doing. So we still run the program for Carroll's up till about a year ago. They sold to RBI Burger King. And over that period of time, I think we've sold about 450 properties for them. And it's just been a theme of that was how I got into it. So once we started that, we started going to all the tenants that were selling to these REITs at high cap rate and said, we could run a program for you. And that's really how my brokerage business took off.
Your family member, dad, uncle, no, it wasn't dad. Dad was a principal. Uncle.
So my uncle was the one who worked for Carroll's Corp.
And was he like in a real estate role or was he in ops? I'm curious to know.
He was president of the company at the time.
Okay.
And then became the CEO. But like basically, and he is one of my big mentors in life. But like he was very much, you got to earn it. So I had this idea is like, you can come in, present to the real estate people, present to the COO. And it took about 6 months to get that first listing. But I learned such a ton of how companies thought about their real estate, the different internal dynamics at some of these places. And really then we went on to Arby's after that. There's a company called Meritage Hospitality that there was like a 30-unit Wendy's franchisee. They're still clients today. I'm actually going to Grand Rapids tomorrow to meet with them again. They went from, I think, 30 locations. They're 400 locations. We've probably done 200 transactions with them. But a theme through my career has always been, relationships over transactions, learning, partnering. And the people that I met at those times, were usually junior or mid-level. And as their career rise and I treated them right, it sort of bolstered my career and like sort of grew into these roles with a lot of these clients.
That's amazing. Really unbelievable path. So you caught wind of the concept of a sale-leaseback by sitting in on a sales team meeting at Marcus, and you eventually were able to secure the listing for Carroll 6 months later. At this point, you're 2 years in, right? Because you had the 18-month stint of being the East Coast hotel salesperson that didn't do a transaction. Then you, I guess, either simultaneously or thereafter had a pivot. You were able to keep the lights on and survive and stay resilient and remain in the business until you had your first sale-leaseback listing and closing with Carroll's. Talk to us about your evolution from there. Obviously your career has done quite a bit since then.
So I did get a referral on closing a hotel on the East Coast, made my first, I think I made $23,000 in 18 months. And then after that 18 months, it was like another 12. So it was almost 3 years to the first Carroll's closing. The evolution happened. It started to snowball at that point. The Carroll's, went from 1 deal to 5 deals to 10 deals. We then got in with Arby's. We then got in with Panera Bread. These were all like clients that were selling to REITs at that time. And although you talk about the industry today, there really wasn't, and that listing was not a sale-leaseback. The original Carroll's deal was a sale of a REIT of an existing lease down the road. So my pitch was to these tenants, and it's very similar to what it is today. The industry and the market has evolved a lot, but hey, we're going to get you better pricing. We're going to get you a better lease, and we can do this at scale. And I started really pushing that narrative in the franchise space, like I said, right around 2000. And there was really no direct way to access the private market. And it was 200-300 basis points wide in cap rate of what people would pay in terms of cap rate to what their institutions were paying at the time.
Wow. Yeah, that's the opportunity for correction. Sounds like you were quite the pioneer in helping get corrected for those sellers.
It was
go ahead. And today there's a team. So I guess while you were building up your book of business, I mean, you know, the math probably, it did take a genius to figure out that $35,000 in total comp in the first 3 years, I think is what we arrived to there, probably doesn't support a team. So how did you, obviously as your book of business started to pick up, how did you determine when to pick up teammates and sort of what did that progression look like throughout your career?
So I was always about collaboration, and I knew what my shortfalls were in terms of writing and marketing. So even like I was lucky that I had, you know, some of the money saved that I burned through over that 3-year period from my real estate holdings. I had a little income from my investment real estate, and I had a wife that had a great job at the time. I thought, you know, I thought she was like a rock star making like $70,000 a year at her like 5th year at KPMG, or maybe at that point. No, she was with KPMG almost 10 years. But that was where I started. But without her and having that, the fallback to pay our rent and expenses, I wouldn't have been able to do it. But we just started, I made the investment getting my first assistant. And one of the things that is interesting about commercial real estate, you know, the mentor-mentee relationship that we really like pride ourselves on as one of our companies. So basically, the relationships over transactions not only is with the client and the broker, but basically the broker and the mentee. The traditional way that I saw it at working at Marcus and Millichap, and they basically had said, hey, you're doing well, you're getting all these listings, we can get you a junior broker, and you can teach that junior broker, and they'll help you with your books, and they're this and they're that. And basically you get, you know, 50% of whatever they make. And that's how it works in most commercial brokerage. You know, the mentor comes in and then takes advantage of the mentee, and then like they train their competition and then they get away. I basically quickly pushed back and said like, well, I don't want to like train my competition. I said, I will pay their expenses, but I want them to be with me long term. And that's how it started. It started with like one assistant, and then just fast forward over the next 20 years at Marcus. I think when we left, we were about 35 people in the organization, sort of working on together. But one of the things I think that I did that was unique, especially because if it was New York versus some other places, I paid people a base salary to learn while they were learning, and then I would teach them and give them an overage over what they produced. And that's sort of the backbone of where we started today. So like starting at most companies, they say, here's the phone, here's how you database owners, here's your value prop, this is what the company is, and just go. Like we've all been about training and mentoring, and people staying with us for a long time. And, you know, at the time we left Marcus, most of my top people have been with me almost 10 years at that point. You know, we left 3 years ago, and, you know, we haven't had any significant turnover at all, because of the philosophy of working together and blending together. And it's the same way with clients. So today at SURMOUNT, after, you know, we rebranded, we left, you know, we're sitting at about 130 people today, all with the same philosophy of everybody has everybody's back. I think we have a unique culture in that, like, you know, I learned a lot of Marcus. I have nothing bad to say about them. I have nothing bad to say about any of these brokerage companies, but the philosophy has just never been what I wanted it to be at any of these places. When I looked, do I join another firm over time? It was always that same philosophy of, you know, make as many cold calls as you possibly can, get as many listings. And it's just not how I believe to run a business. And my philosophy as a broker has always been do right by people, tell them the truth, work hard for them, have the hard conversations, and it will lead to long-term success. And basically how we grew out the business and how everyone in all our offices thinks today is get the relationship and the closings and the transactions will come.
I want to make sure I clarify this. You had 35 people on your team when you left Marcus, correct?
I think it was 35 to 40, maybe. I'm not exactly
Give or
sure.
take. And I heard you say 130 today.
Yeah.
That was 3 years ago.
Yeah.
That's quite the exponential growth.
Well, a lot of people just reached out, and, people that we've known in the industry. There was a lot of, what I would say, people that had both, worked with me and Marcus for a long time, and then brokers who we had done transactions with. One of the things that we saw, and this isn't unique to Marcus, like any big brokerage company was always, you dealt with the people in your company, and it wasn't like as much open brokerage. When we were at Marcus, we sort of believed in this, do right by the client. We didn't care if the co-broker came from Marcus and Millichap, came from CB, came from JLL. We wanted the best pricing for the client. And that's how we always ran these programs. And we met a lot of great people along the way that were wearing, a different company jersey, but they were good brokers. They knew how to work. And over time, just even quickly, as soon as we made the announcement, people were like, can we join you? Can we come in? And we've been very strategic about, who we let in, who we want to work with. But like, we had a really good base of working for almost 25 years with people in the industry. So it's been a good run, and we're really proud of our culture and the people that have joined us, and that's why we've had the growth that we've had.
I love that. There is a relationships over transactions hat in the ZIC conference room. I can confirm. So
nice.
Good. Yeah, for sure. So what's the biggest curveball you've ever been dealt?
There's a few of them. I mean, sticking with it after really 3 years of making no money was probably the hardest thing. After being fairly successful, and it was all relative in terms of, like, we're talking about pricing of where we're at today versus, what my 270 units were really worth at that time and what they were producing in terms of income. But more of a frustration level of, can I actually do this?
Yeah.
And one of the things we try and really do when we hire people in any of our divisions is, look, this isn't going to be easy. I think a lot of, the lore of brokerage is like, you're going to close a big deal fast and you're going to make a lot of money. It just doesn't work that way. You got to put in hard work. You got to be realistic. I sort of was drinking the Kool-Aid when I came in. So I'd say that was my probably hardest challenge as like a young adult, like shifting businesses and then, trying to see if I could make it as a broker was probably my hardest one.
Sure. Speaking of that time where you were new and the Kool-Aid came in and all of a sudden you found out that there was mouthwash and spoiled milk in it.
Say it one more time.
I just made up a ridiculous thing. Basically, you were drinking Kool-Aid, but you didn't realize it had mouthwash and spoiled milk in it with it.
or that the jug was way half empty and there was nothing in there.
Yeah. When you apply whatever metaphor you want, that it did not meet the expectations that you walked into the door with.
So like, being realistic with people and managing, people's expectation of how long it takes to build a successful business and build relationships. It's really, from a brokerage standpoint, it's challenging because everybody wants to give you the shortcuts. There really are no shortcuts. It's do right by people, work really hard, be the, most knowledgeable and study, the property that you're listing, the market that you're listing, and just doing right by, your client. So there's no miracle shortcuts. Everyone says, this firm is the best and you're going to get there faster and better. It's really up to the individual and up to the people that they surround themselves with and the culture.
Sure. So going back to that time and reflecting on that and fast forwarding to where you are now, which is, as far as certainly within the brokerage world, at the top of the mountain. And I definitely want to get to what Surmount's up to here in a minute. But if you could go back and either give yourself or somebody who's walking into the business that's, let's say, 5 years or less in now advice, what would that advice be?
I always go back to learn from everyone. I have a friend in investment banking, and like as they like are working, trying to build their book of business, everybody targets the big people. I want this client and I want that client. You really just have to be cognizant of, where you sit and building those good relationships. And it takes time. It doesn't mean closings. It means, when an owner comes to you or another broker, you don't need to target the guy that has 100 properties. You need to get in with the guy that has 1 or 2 or 3, because commercial real estate is long dated, right? Like most people their average hold time is 10 years on a single tenant net lease property. So even if they love you and you meet someone, they may not transact for 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, and trying to shortcut that relationship really is where people get cut off. So it's like the guy with 1 property in 10 years that you've called on that you may get a closing. If you do everything right in 5 or 7, he may refer you to 5 or 10 other people because, you've been reliable, you've given him comps, you've talked to him about his property, and sort of building a book of business through just doing right by people. And, the people that you think are the smallest end up sometimes being the biggest clients. I mean, I could give numerous stories of someone that worked somewhere that was an analyst, and we worked hard to help them in their position. And then all of a sudden, fast forward 10, 11 years, they're the CEO of a publicly traded REIT. And they're dictating millions and millions of dollars in business. They're not giving it to the guy that is now the top guy out there. They're giving it to the guys that helped them early on in their career. So I'm like a broken record on this. It's all about gauging your relationships and building those relationships over time. And that's what I tell people all the time. It's not going to come easy. It's sort of the golden rule. Just, do what is right for the people, and it'll pay off in the long run.
I have to say this because I hope as an owner, as a fellow entrepreneur, this will give you a tremendous amount of pride. The 2 or 3 teammates of yours that you have at Surmount that we work with here at Zig embody everything that you just rambled on. I think of Adam Fridlander, I think of Cade Kern. Shout out to those guys in the event that they listen to this, which I'm sure they will. They have not only sought that coaching from you over the years, they have implemented it into their business. And I, as a client, or our team at Zig as a client, is a firsthand, we're firsthand witnesses, bystanders, whatever you want to call it, and really can advocate for that messaging. So the proof is in the actions too. And I think anybody listening to this deserves to know that. And it says a ton about the company and what you've built as a leader there, Glenn.
Well, I really appreciate it. It really makes me happy because it literally is like there's some brokers out there in the world that do what we do that just don't fit our culture. Like the culture and the people here are really what makes me proud. And like what I'm doing every day is supporting those people. And we just don't tolerate short-term gain, versus long-term. So it takes a long time to build it. We all work together. We all have everybody's back. And it's really good to hear that, I love that. That's what I'm proud of more so than anything, with our organization.
I love that. Well, let's talk about the other stuff. Let's talk about the more tangible things. So as we work toward wrapping up here, what does Surmount do? Because you guys are not your typical brokerage shop. And I think it's important that the listeners out there and by the way, Glenn, we've done a good job of not only just being a commercial real estate podcast, but we've focused a lot on bringing operators that are franchisees or have their own brands on the show. We've gotten some people that have dabbled in private equity, done roll-ups. So I think that your message and what you guys do, sort of your elevator pitch and the services that you offer is worth highlighting. So people can kind of get to understand that Glen and the team at Surmount are not just your typical net lease brokers.
So Surmount basically, it has 4 business lines, which when we're at Marcus, we've been doing what we've done in these 4 business lines for close to 15 years in total. On some of the business lines, close to 25 years. But the main core business lines are brokerage, both institutional and private. We have an institutional coverage group that represents some of the largest private equity sponsors, largest publicly traded REITs, largest publicly traded franchisors, franchisees, big private equity buying, industrial buying. That's all covered by our institutional coverage group. And then we have what we call our private capital group, which is basically existing net leases, developers, everything like that. That's one of the larger business lines out there. The second business line is advisory. So that deals with non-sold real estate. So those same clients in terms of operators and publicly traded companies that are using the real estate as tenants, we represent them in restructuring their leases, buying back properties, renegotiating things. In that institutional coverage group, we have about 18 people that help with that. At any given time, we're engaged in a few thousand lease negotiations. So that's our advisory practice. We have a construction management and development practice, which is very unique, helping the same clients in terms of site selection, managing and hiring the GCs. We have about 8 construction managers right now. And, most of our construction management work is usually both fee and JV related, where we're then using our 4th business line, which is our balance sheet, to co-invest into some projects and really help throw fuel on the fire for a lot of the growth for our clients. Any given time, we have, give or take, 100 to 150 projects going on. And that varies in industry from industrial distribution, restaurant, healthcare, plasma, you name it, convenience stores, in working in our development team. And then lastly, we have a balance sheet that we use, and we co-manage for a few family offices a bunch of large portfolios of net lease. At this point, we have several $1 billion that we manage and control, both buy and sell for a lot of the clients. So we took all those things and rebranded them into Surmount. They all had separate names. We were branded under NNN Pro for a long time on Brokerage. We had STNL Advisors that was doing the advisory practice. We had UGDC that was doing the construction aspect, and we put them all under one roof and branding it all as Surmount. So it's much easier for clients to come to us and understand what we do in all those business lines.
I love that. So you've had this incredible trajectory from being a hustler, college kid, investing in your own portfolio and making it happen, to essentially starting back at zero at 30 in brokerage, building up a huge brokerage team, leaving with 35 people, starting your own company again, and scaling it to now, currently, as we record this in early September of 25, of 130 some odd people. Inevitably, there's a path here to where you're not going to have to work anymore, and you'll choose to walk away on your terms if you decide to do that, or whatever it may be, whatever that time is, or however that takes out. There will be some talk of that and media publishing, whatever we're consuming at that time. What do you want those things to say about your legacy in this business?
My legacy is all about those relationships. Like, I'm really proud of the organization that we built. I'm just one part of it. I've helped build the culture. Our CEO, our COO, Nico DePaul, and the rest of our team, to, just as you said it, like, embody the culture that I built and continue it on, whether that's, we have no real goal to sell at this point. We want to grow the organization. We want to, we just want to do right by our clients. And, the review that you just gave in dealing with our team is what we want everyone in the market to have of us. And, the money comes, right? Like, I really enjoy spending the time mentoring both, some of our more junior people, some of our senior people. I'm spending my time as CEO just assisting both in the recruiting, in the support of brokerage, and the support of our construction division, and the support of everything. So really, at the end of the day, my goal is just to continue to build and manage a great organization, and where it goes, I'm not sure.
There you go. I love that. Without screwing this thing up any more than I probably already have, Glenn, thank you on behalf of all our entire listener base. Your story has been incredible here, and we can't wait to see where the Surmount story continues to go.
Really appreciate it, Aaron.